Yes, people, this show is a thing, and we're going to cover it. Don't worry, it's going to get pretty weird, and it'll be great. Rayman the Animated Series is an animated series by Ubisoft during 1999. The series came off from the success of Rayman 2. It had a plan of 26 episodes before being cancelled after 4 episodes. They were working on a 5th episode called My Fair Lacmac before cancellation, and it has a good amount of fan speculation in terms of the plot. Very few countries in Europe got to watch the show. It was mainly France, Germany, and the Netherlands. However, North America and France got VHS releases. By the way, the VHS is pretty rare, so don't go shopping forever for it. In spite of its rarity, however, there has been a decent amount of people that have talked about this show. In fact, the show is kind of popular in the Rayman community, and by that, it's kind of a meme to them. It's memey to the point it got its own Reanimated collab, which has cameos from people like Nitro Rat. However, this show doesn't have the best reputation. Not that it's bad, it's just weird. I should know, me and a certain pal of mine like to joke about this show and Rayman's pronunciation of the word car.
My friend here can fix your car.
Oh yeah, we definitely will get to that later. So today, I will be talking about this show and what it's about. Nothing more and nothing less. It's not me explaining why it's a decent adaptation like DKC. It's not gonna be me explaining the non-existent lore of the show like F-Zero. Just me doing a critique on a wacky show based on a limbless man. I feel like it'll be a fine start to do a synopsis segment, since, well, you know, there were only 4 episodes made. Due to how the show only has 4 episodes, I will summarize all of them, starting with the first episode, Lacmac Napping. It begins with a circus landing in town. And yes, I do mean land, it's a flying circus. The circus is owned by Rigatoni, and Lacmac is the main star of the show. Unfortunately, the performers aren't treated the best, as they are all locked up in cages and guided by whips. We actually get a glimpse of what the owner is like with this scene. So the show does a decent job at giving us an idea on Rigatoni's cruelty. After showing what the performers' lives in the circus are like, we get to see Admiral Razorbeard and Rigatoni trying to train a new member that just joined. That member, of course, being Rayman. And they fail to have him do tricks, so he gets sent to the cages. Once he goes there, we get to learn more about Rigatoni being a criminal. They try to think of ways to escape, and Cookie tests a new iron bar trick with Lacmac. They soon realize that Lacmac has super strength, which they use to break free. Using a bread knife, Rayman cuts away out of the circus and they run off, with the circus crashing down to the ground. Upset by this, Rigatoni calls an officer named Detective Grubb to help capture them. The next morning, the gang celebrate their newfound freedom, but they find a guy who has been struggling with fixing a car. Cookie apparently knows how to fix it, and does so. They get to keep it in exchange for helping him. This also begins the many instances of Rayman saying car. Don't worry. There are more instances of him pronouncing car as car. The second episode, No Parking, begins with them driving down the city. Detective Grubb spots them in his area and goes after them. It leads to a pursuit to get away from Grubb, which they do, and leads to Grubb crashing into a bunch of jack-in-the-boxes. They park at, well, a park to hide for now. While they stay at the park, Flips finds a teddy bear and wants to show it to everyone, but everyone is busy, so she goes up to the car alone with Lacmac watching from the distance. However, the car was parked in a no parking area and it got towed. Rayman and Bettina hear the car getting towed and chase after it, but it's too late. Rayman tries to reassure everyone that it's just a car, but Lacmac claims that Flips was in the car, so they go out to find the car to get Flips back. They notice that Grubb is at the station they're at, so Rayman goes in disguise and asks where they can find the car. Grubb tells them to go to the scrapyard, and Rayman idiotically takes off his hat and Grubb chases after them. They eventually get away and Grubb vows to catch up with them. They make it to the scrapyard. They climb to the top of the conveyor belt where cars are devoured by a terrifying demonic cow. Since Rayman's hand sentiently zooms over to grab the car in time, he saves Flips. The celebration is short, however, since they are caught by Detective Grubb. Lacmac comes in time and chases Grubb off and they get in. But since he can't drive, they fall off a cliff, not before Rayman uses his hair and crashes in an apartment room. Little do they know that they live right above Detective Grub, and he's vowing to capture them once more. The third episode, High Anxiety, starts with Cookie having a headache. Bettina starts teasing him from being annoyed by his complaining. Rayman advises he should go to the doctor, or the doctor. Cookie denies due to his paranoia on catching a sickness, and after further convincing by Bettina, he complies. He goes through an appointment, and the doctor tells him he's fine, but he deems him insane and is put in their asylum. As they try to figure out a way to break him out, they see Grub walk in and they hide. After getting past the front desk, they go look for him, and it turns out that he is visiting his mother, whom Cookie is roommates with. And Grub is suspicious about Cookie. Little note, this is easily the funniest episode because there are some really good gags like this one.
What are we curing today?
Ligirophobia, the fear of loud noises.
Oh, sorry to disturb you all.
Once Grub connects the dots, Rayman and the gang barge in and get Cookie. They're chased by both the guards and Grub. Eventually, Grub corners them but is knocked out by his mother and they escape. Grub is mistaken for a really scary patient from early on and is dragged to a cell. The episode ends with them driving off with Cookie learning a lesson about not complaining. I guess. I know I said I liked the jokes in this episode, but my favorite episode of the four has to be the last one, Big Day. It begins with Cookie having to go to the store to get an ingredient for something he is cooking. They check to see if Grub is gone, and they begin hypothesizing on his whereabouts. Mac is looking at a crack on the floor where they can see his room, which gives Cookie an idea to make a telescope on the floor to spy on him. Bettina is the first to look and sees Grub come home with a bouquet of flowers. She draws the conclusion that he has a date, which Cookie is in denial of. Rayman realizes that if the date is successful, he won't bother them as much. So Grub gets ready for his date, and when he's finished, she shows up. When she steps in, Grub seems to do a really bad job on the date. Not gonna lie. Rayman proposes to help him out, but the group votes against it. But with further convincing, they decide to help. While the couple are separate temporarily, they set up the table. When they come back and start talking, Rayman and Bettina sneak into the kitchen. Realizing that what Grub has cooked is terrible, they get Cookie to cook a 4-course meal. Mac, being the certified bruh moment he is, drops an entire load of plates, causing Grub to run into the kitchen. They escape in time, and Grub, not suspecting a single thing on the food, serves it. All seems well until Grub uses the table covers as a bib and all the food falls on his date, causing her to leave and Grub in sad posting hours. However, Rayman comes up with one last idea to use a singing telegram to propose a movie date. The lady calls Grub and tells him about going to the movies as the gang all look in satisfaction. That's it for the entire series, and oh boy, was that very interesting. I'll start with the positive stuff, and surprisingly, there is a decent amount. I like how even before the performance, it is shown that working at the circus is not pleasant. Their boss is just awful, which makes the perfect motivation for them to escape. Also, the show sets clear stakes after the first episode. Do the thing they need to do without getting spotted by Grub. Another thing I love is how the characters interact with each other. Their personalities let the characters play off of each other very easily. Also, the show is actually pretty funny at times. There are some well-written jokes in the show.
G-U-R-A-Q-T-I-N-V-U. Ooh, I don't blame you. I am pretty good looking.
However, there is a pretty big issue. Like how stuff happens so the plot can progress forward. For example, Cookie is a good mechanic without knowing anything about that beforehand. Also, how does Rayman know that Cookie is a good mechanic? We never see Cookie do anything engineer related, especially when Rayman comes on screen. I guess you could say that they already know because Cookie knows what cast iron steel is, but that's not saying much. You can also say that he knows how security cameras work, but I am pretty sure Rigatoni already told them about that. The avoid Grub plotline does get repetitive due to setting decent stakes, but they're not really that high. And plus, they really only trigger chase scenes out of pure stupidity. Also, we never see Rigatoni and Razorbeard after the first episode. I wouldn't think it's fair to criticize this because the lack of episodes the show got, and we might have got the episodes of them if the show actually continued. Those are the pros and cons of the storytelling in this show. The writers actually tried with this plot and have a mix of continuous and episodic stories. Although there are some flaws that come with it, it's not a literary masterpiece, but it's still good for a cartoon series. Now, there's more than story to this, and there's also animation to cover. Similar to Donkey Kong Country, the show was made with CG in mind. However, I think the CG looks much better than in DKC. It doesn't look half bad for it being in the late 90s. It's pretty clear that they even used the art style for Rayman 2. Heck, it even uses his design from that game. However, is it really that good? Even if the animation looks better than in DKC, it certainly hasn't aged the best. Everything is just so heavily textured that it feels like you're watching a PS2 game cutscene. What I also don't like is how stiff the lip sync move, and how it doesn't really sync up with the audio. The biggest issue for me is, and I'll be honest, I am not really a fan of how they use Rayman 2's art style for the CGI. It comes off as a decent SFM animation, and it could make characters like Lackmack more creepy than goofy. I especially dislike Patina's design. They were going for a more human style, but it did not translate well here. I much prefer the designs in Rayman 3, especially how they redesigned Rayman in that game. One missed opportunity I see with the character designs is to make a diverse population. All we get are these big-nosed, slug-like creatures as the main race of people, and that's it. It just makes the main cast feel more out of place, which granted, it does make sense since the characters are fugitives, but I digress. We could have had more people like Cookie or Lackmack. Heck, it wouldn't hurt to have more humans like Patina. In fact, we could have had some people like Rayman, similar to the first Rayman game. Oh yeah, we could have had people from the game's citizens as well. You know, like what the show is based off of? It might be unfair to harp on the show since it was unfinished, and who knows. We might have seen these be completely realized as the show went on. But I do doubt it since the show is more like its own thing. That aside, let's talk about some positives because there are some to talk about. First off, the movements are actually pretty fluid, which works because this is a cartoon. There are a decent plethora of chase scenes in the show, so the fluid movement really benefits those scenes when they come in. Despite how the entire city is populated with these slug people, they actually took the effort to give each one a unique look. They also managed to get pretty creative with the city at times, like the subway trains act like air trolleys with a roller coaster type track design. There is also the scrapyard with this terrifying looking cow that eats the cars. Even with the lack of game representation, I can definitely see the city in a Rayman game. Even with the flaws in the animation, that is expected for a 90s cartoon. And it looks good for one, so let's jump to our next segment. And what I have been talking about a little in this segment, the characters. This is by far my biggest criticism with the show, so I'll go over the main characters first before doing that. Starting off with our main crew, Rayman is the main entitled character. He is optimistic and thinks quickly on his feet, sometimes leading into trouble. Patina is the sympathetic, no-nonsense member of the group and often clashes with Cookie's personality. Cookie is the paranoid and pessimistic member of the group, but he is also well-meaning and very talented. Is it bad that I relate to this character? Flips is just the precious bean of the group and doesn't have much of a personality. Lackmack is your average dumb and fat character that likes to eat. But he does care for his fellow members, so there is some likability to him. There are also our villains, starting with Detective Grub. He is a cop who has been tasked to hunt the gang down, and he is the character you'll see the most often. He is more of an obstacle than a villain, something to add tension to the conflict. They did add a little more to his character by the last episode, but it isn't really much. There is also Rigatoni, who we only see in the first episode. He is the owner of the circus the gang are from, and he is a pretty cruel owner. He even states that he was a gangster at one point, and his cruelty links to that. He is accompanied by Admiral Razorbeard, who is the only character besides Rayman that comes from the games. He is the antagonist of Rayman 2, so of course they had to put him in somewhere. He also looks like a setup for a British person joke. I am not kidding. Rayman and Razorbeard are the only characters in the show that are from the games. This is my main problem with this show. It pays so little to its source material that it feels like a different show. Having original characters in a video game adaptation is not a bad thing, but Rayman goes overboard with it. Donkey Kong Country paid more homage to the source material and still made some characters. with worse animation no less. At least Flips actually feels like a Rayman character. It's similar to the fairies throughout the games, especially in Rayman 3. Kirby Right Back at Ya is a great example of doing this type of characters, where they made the cappy enemies into townsfolk and gave them character traits. I guess that since the show was cancelled, they might have not been given the opportunity to bring in more characters from the games. Now, judging the show for what it is, are the extra characters any good? Well, yeah, they do a decent job to help the world building of the show. Each one is uniquely designed, and we do see a couple interact with the main characters as well. Like when Cookie is put in the asylum, he befriends the old lady that turns out to be Grub's mom. Even Grub's date in the final episode. You know, it's funny that some of the side characters we see are associated with Grub. One more thing I would like to mention, that the voice acting is just mwah, chef's kiss. Let's start with Rayman, voiced by Billy West. And yes, that Billy West. He was going for a Boston accent, and it's probably the worst one I've ever heard.
But you don't look like Lack-Mac. Well, you're not doing a very good job. Lack-Mac is goofy and he jumps around a lot.
I mainly blame the voice direction because Billy West is a great actor, and he would have been a great Rayman. At least he eventually got to play Murphy in Rayman 3, with much better voice direction. Inspector Grub, Lack-Mac, and Rigatoni are all voiced by Danny Mann, who has voiced many additional characters in movies and shows. He does a great job making each character sound distinct. Bettina has had 3 different VAs, being Carolyn Lawrence, Lacey Shabert, and Kate Susie. And I do think that the latter 2 tried to replicate her voice very well. Cookie is voiced by Carlos Alazraqui, who also voices Admiral Razorbeard, and I can easily tell that they have the same voice actor. They kind of sound the same.
No chance. Rigatoni knows our every move.
You're not going anywhere, pal. You do the tricks, and then maybe we'll feed you.
We only hear him as Cookie, however, so it's not really that much of an issue. So yeah, the show has some decent voice acting, with Billy West easily being the weakest one. With better direction, he could have been on par with his other performances. So that is it for the characters, with voice acting to go along with it. However, it is time for me to conclude the video. To answer the question, is this show at all bad? Let alone, is it fair enough to call this show bad? Not really. I feel like if it had the chance to continue, it actually would have gotten better. Must I remind you that this show had 26 planned episodes. Whether they would have had a season 2 could be up for debate. So what is my verdict for the show? Well, it's kinda complicated. On one hand, it really does succeed at a couple of things, like the characters and how their personalities make great interactions, how the animation looks good for the late 90s despite not aging that well, how the storyline sets up the motivations of the characters and the stakes that they're in. Also, how could I forget some pretty funny jokes in the show that are chuckle-worthy? On the other hand, there are some flaws that hold it back from being good, such as some characters not being as fleshed out as others, some of the events just happening for the sake of the plot to progress, the ugly mixed bag that is the voice acting and direction for the voices. How could I forget the lack of characters from the games besides Rayman and Razorbeard? In fact, the Jack in the Boxes have Eddie from Tonic Trouble. These problems would be invalidated if the show continued. But that is the point. The show suffers from an early cancellation, which tremendously hurts it. Rayman needs a second chance to have a TV show. And no, Rabbids Invasion does not count. The best inspiration to take from is the UbiArt engine used for Rayman Origins and Legends. A TV show in that style would be brilliant considering how the visuals looked great in those games. Plus, they can use characters from those games as well, instead of completely bombarding it with original characters. Plus, I would love to see the antagonists from all the other games as villains. However, this is only mere wishful thinking. Knowing Ubisoft, they're gonna do Jack Dooley's squat with Rayman. Maybe they could use a series to bring Rayman to a new generation. However, nowadays, Ubisoft focuses more on their popular franchises and microtransactions. Plus, Ubisoft prefers the Rabbids a lot more due to their popularity. But it's not a bad thing since we are getting the Mario plus Rabbids sequel. You could say that it couldn't happen since Michel Ancel left in September of 2020. While that may be true, if it wasn't for the fact that Rayman 3 was done without Michel Ancel because he was working on Beyond Good and Evil. Plus, he wasn't even involved in the show, so it might just work. I'm not saying it can be done without him, it's just a point I needed to get across. Who knows? Whether TV show or game, let's just hope Rayman comes back. If Klonoa can come back, so can he. Anything is possible. That's weird. The video went all the way without a certain somebody barging in. Oh well, sorry if I took so long to make this video. I have been pretty busy as of late. I promise to make more videos later this year. Good night, everybody.